Picture this. You walk into a bowling alley on a Friday night. The smell of stale beer fills the air, and somewhere in the distance, someone's celebrating a spare. You lace up those iconic red and blue rental shoes, grab a ball that feels like it weighs as much as a small dog, and step up to the line. To throw a perfect game, you need just 12 strikes. Just 12 consecutive strikes, and you'll have achieved something that fewer than 1 in 10,000 bowlers will ever accomplish. To put that into perspective, you're more likely to get struck by a bolt of lightning, win a small lottery, or even get accepted to Harvard than you are to bowl a perfect game. But why is that number so small? And why are those 12 strikes so impossibly difficult? Today, I'm gonna break down all the crazy, maddening science behind why bowling a perfect game is one of the hardest feats in all sports. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at a bowling alley the same way again. Bowling looks easy, right? You just roll a heavy ball down a long lane and try to knock down all 10 pins. Compare that to something like baseball, where you have to hit a 95-mile-per-hour fastball or return a tennis serve at Wimbledon. Bowling appears almost leisurely. There's no one trying to tackle you. There's no shot clock in a league, and no opponent directly interfering with your shot. But here's where bowling reveals its true nature. Think of it like this. Imagine trying to park your car in a tight parking space, except the parking space is 60 feet away and you're driving blindfolded. And imagine you don't have a steering wheel either. That's essentially what you're doing every time you release a bowling ball. But to really understand this example that I just gave, we have to look at the lane. The lane itself is 60 feet long and just over 3.5 feet wide. Your bowling ball, meanwhile, is roughly 8.5 inches of diameter. Mathematically, this gives you very little margin for error. We're talking about a level of precision that not even a gambling addict would place a bet on. Most people think a strike is just about hitting the pins really hard and praying they fall. But not necessarily. That's like saying cooking or baking is just about putting food in heat and hoping it tastes good. A real proper strike, a perfect strike, requires the ball to enter what bowlers call the pocket. For right-handers, this is the space between the 1 pin, the head pin, and the 3 pin. For the lefties, it's on the other side, the 1 pin and the 2 pin. But here's the thing, hitting the pocket isn't enough. You see, the ball needs to hit the pocket at the right angle, with the right amount of speed and the right amount of rotation. Think about it more like dominoes than bowling. You know how when you set up a long line of dominoes, you need to flick that first one with just the right amount of force? Too little, and the chain reaction stops halfway. Too much, and the dominoes go flying in random directions. Bowling pins work similarly, except for instead of falling in a line, they need to create a specific chain reaction that clears all 10 pins. And while there is a little bit of misroom in this, you need to hit the pocket correctly. When you hit the pocket correctly, the head pin flies into the 2 and 4 pins, while your ball continues through to hit the 5 and the 9 pins. The 3 pin takes out the 6 and 10 pins, the 5 pin eliminates the 8 pin, and if everything goes perfectly, the remaining pins create a beautiful cascade that clears the entire rack. Miss the pocket by even an inch, and this delicate choreography falls apart. However, this is a perfect strike. This is what happens if everything goes perfectly. And you know how I mentioned how there's misroom? Now we move on to the different types of strikes. Not all strikes are created equal, and understanding this is crucial to appreciating why a perfect game is so difficult. There are essentially 3 to 4 different types of strikes, and only one of them is reliable enough to string together for a perfect game. And the type of strike that carries the most changes depending on the center. The first type we have is what we call a light strike, or a light shaker. This happens when your ball hits the pocket, but doesn't have enough power or not enough entry angle. The pins fall, but barely, and as mentioned in the name, they kind of shake down and fall. Light strikes may work twice in a game, but they're not very repeatable. They're the bowling equivalent of getting a lucky guess on a multiple choice test. Think about a light strike like a pitcher throwing it directly into a hitter's sweet spot and the hitter just happening to strike. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's the heavy strike. This is where your ball plows through the pins with too much force or hits way too high on the pocket. Sure, all the pins go down, but it's a little bit messy and inconsistent and usually leads to leaving either the 4 pin or the 6 pin. However, heavy strikes are much more dangerous than light strikes, as if it goes slightly too high, you could be left with a deadly split. The third type is the one I mentioned earlier, the perfect strike. This is when everything goes perfectly. Your ball hits the exact spot on the pocket that it needs to, right entry angle, right speed, right amount of revolutions, everything goes perfect, all the pins go sent backwards. Whenever you see it, it looks effortless, and it looks inevitable. They're always the strikes that you want when you're trying to bowl a perfect game. And then that fourth type I mentioned earlier is when you cross over and you get just a little bit lucky and you domino the entire rack. This is what we like to call a crossover strike or a Brooklyn strike. These are not reliable at all and might get you made fun of if you try to throw these. Let's talk numbers, because the math behind bowling a perfect game as a league bowler is very different than a professional bowler. Professionals, the absolute best in the world, typically have a strike percentage of around 60 to 70% on a typical shot. That sounds pretty good until you realize what it means to bowl that 12 times in a row. So if we assume a generous 70% strike rate, the probability of rolling 12 strikes in a row is 7 to the 12th power. That equals about 0.0138 or about 1.38%. And remember, that's for professional bowlers at the top of their games, and even though they might bowl on harder conditions, I'll get into that later, they're still the best in the world. For the average recreational bowler, the guys who just walk in and throw the ball straight, the strike percentage drops somewhere between 5 and 10%. At the very high 10%, the probability of bowling a perfect game becomes 0.1 to the 12th power, or 1 in a trillion. You have a better chance of winning the Powerball lottery than throwing a perfect game as a random bowler. But just wait, because it gets worse. These calculations assume that each shot is independent, like flipping a coin 12 times. But bowling isn't necessarily independent. Each frame builds mental pressure, and pressure changes everything. Here's where bowling gets really cruel. Unlike many other sports where pressure might make you try harder or give you an adrenaline boost, in bowling, pressure is almost always detrimental. Think about it like this. Have you ever tried to fall asleep when you really need to be well rested? The harder you try, the more elusive it is to actually fall asleep. Bowling a perfect game has that same psychological trap. Let's say you've bowled the first 8 in a row. You're just 4 strikes away from a bowling perfect game. Your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty. That smooth, repeatable motion you've been grooving all night, it suddenly feels foreign. Your arm feels like it belongs to someone else. Everything feels heavy, everything feels slow, even if you begin to rush. This is what we in the bowling community call choking. And it's not a character flaw or a lack of mental toughness. It's actually a well-documented phenomenon. The higher the stakes get, our brains start overthinking automatic processes. It's like if someone asked you to think about every single muscle movement involved in walking. Suddenly, putting one foot in front of the other becomes a little bit more confusing. Professional golfer Sam Snead once said something that perfectly applies to bowling. Practice puts brains in your muscles, but that pressure suddenly takes those brains back out of the muscle. Those 12 strikes require muscle memory so ingrained that you could bowl them in your sleep. But the moment your conscious mind starts thinking about the process, everything falls apart. If the psychological pressure wasn't enough, bowling has another cruel trick up its sleeve: lane conditions. Every bowling lane is coated with a thin layer of oil, and this oil pattern determines how your ball will react as it travels down the lane. Think about it like driving on different road surfaces in racing. A ball on a dry lane behaves completely different than a ball on an oily lane, just like a car handles differently on pavement versus ice. But here's the worst part about trying to bowl a perfect game. Lane conditions change throughout the game. Every time a ball rolls down the lane, it picks up some oil from some areas and deposits it in others. It's a very slow, very subtle form of erosion. But after, say, 50 games, the oil pattern looks nothing like it did at the start of the night. But even in one game, that perfect shot that worked in the first frame might leave you a 7-10 split in the ninth, through no fault of your own. So that's why professional bowlers and league bowlers spend hours trying to discover how to play the oil patterns before tournaments. And these charts, to the average person, look like complete gibberish. It just shows where it is, how heavy it is, and what the shape of the pattern is. But this is only so helpful, as after a few games, or maybe even a few shots, it can play completely different. Another thing that makes 300 so hard is the equipment. Modern bowling has become incredibly high-tech. And while this has made the sport more exciting and accessible, it's also introduced another variable that can derail a perfect game: equipment failure. Today's bowling balls are stronger than they've ever been, and a big issue that comes with that is the fact that they change the lanes in the ways that they do. Because these bowling balls are so strong, they move around oil in much different ways, which could cause the balls to react earlier or much later than intended. Due to this, the game transitions even faster than it already did. The smallest malfunction in a swing could ruin everything. And perhaps the most underappreciated aspect of bowling a perfect game is simply persistence. A professional bowler might bowl 200 games or more per week. They're constantly working on their form, studying lane conditions, and fine-tuning their equipment. Even at that pace, most professional bowlers can only bowl a handful of perfect games on the tour per year. Some don't even get any. For league and recreational bowlers, the persistence is almost superhuman. The average recreational bowler might bowl 1 to 3 times per week, and at that pace, even if you had the skill level of a professional, which you almost certainly don't, you'd still need years of consistent play just to get enough attempts at one. Honestly, it's a lot like trying to hit a hole-in-one or hit a full-court basketball shot. Even if you had perfect technique, you'd need to take 1,000 shots maybe just to sink one. Except with bowling, if you're practicing alone, you might get to chance one every 15 minutes. However, mess up just once in the 12 shots, and it's over. But to really understand how difficult a perfect game in bowling is, let's compare it to some of the most well-known perfect achievements in other sports. In baseball, for example, a perfect game, or a no-hitter, means retiring all 27 batters you face without letting them score a single one. It's incredibly rare, happening maybe once every year across all of Major League Baseball. But here's the thing, a baseball pitcher has 8 teammates helping him. One amazing defensive play can save an entire perfect game. Pull you out. You can't play defense, and you don't have any opponent trying to hit the ball back at you. It's just you, the ball, the pins, and the unforgiving laws of physics. Every shot has to be almost perfect. In bowling, there's nowhere to hide. Every frame is identical. Every shot requires the exact same precision, and there's no plan B, no alternative strategy, and no way to compensate for a weakness. You either hit your mark, or you don't. And that defines whether the game is over or can continue. This creates a unique form of mental pressure that most people like to call tilt, the mental state where frustration causes you to create increasingly poor decisions. Bowling's version of tilt, because your technical requirements are so precise, even a tiny amount of mental static can throw off your entire approach. Imagine trying to paint a masterpiece while someone is whispering in your ear how important it is not to mess up. That's what the later frames of a potential perfect game feel like. Every muscle in your body knows exactly what to do, but your brain typically interferes trying to help more, and that causes the end of a perfect game in most cases. A lot of bowlers online misconceive how hard a 300 actually is, and typically, a lot of the time, it's because they've thrown multiple of them. But if it's your first time throwing a 300 game, that pressure is going to be much higher than every subsequent chance. So why do bowlers keep chasing perfect games despite the astronomical odds? Honestly, it's for the same reason that people climb mountains, write novels, or try to master musical instruments. The difficulty isn't a bug, it's a feature. The near impossibility of a perfect game is exactly what makes it so meaningful. If perfect games were so easy, they wouldn't be perfect, they'd just be games. The rarity creates the value, and the value creates the obsession. Every bowler who stepped up to the line has imagined that magical moment when the 10th frame arrives and all 3 strikes are waiting to be thrown. They've imagined the sound of 12 consecutive strikes, maybe the feeling of achieving something that borders on the impossible. And maybe that's the real beauty of bowling. It's a sport where perfection is theoretically achievable, but practically impossible. It's close enough to touch, but just far enough away to keep you coming back, frame after frame, game after game, and year after year. So the next time you're at the bowling alley and you see someone string together a few strikes, take a moment to appreciate what you're witnessing. Every small strike is a small victory against overwhelming odds. If you're ever lucky enough to witness someone's first perfect game, remember that you're watching someone do something that's statistically almost impossible to the normal person. So whether you bowl once a year or once a day, that perfect game is always there, waiting in the realm of possibility. 12 strikes, and that's all it takes. Simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution, and it's absolutely magical when it occurs. But that's all I've got time for today. So let me know what you think in the comment section below, and leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. But that's all I've got time for today, so see you guys next time.